Have you ever wondered why things happen the way they do? Why some events seem random, while others feel like a clear result of your choices? Why one kind act ripples out and changes the tone of an entire day, while other actions seem to vanish without a trace? It's a mystery we all live inside of, one that reaches into everything we do, from our relationships and careers to the thoughts we think in the privacy of our own minds. And yet, across centuries and civilizations, one principle keeps showing up again and again, like a thread stitching together science, wisdom, traditions, and human psychology: the law of cause and effect. But what exactly does that mean? Is it purely mechanical, like billiard balls knocking into one another? Is it moral, spiritual, energetic? Or is it something deeper, a dynamic, interconnected pattern that reflects not just our actions, but our intentions, our attention, our very consciousness? Today, we're going to explore this law through three profound lenses: science, Buddhism, and spirituality. And along the way, we'll uncover how each of them, in their own way, can help us live more consciously, more compassionately, and more powerfully. So settle in, because what we're about to unpack just might change the way you see your past and shape the way you move into your future. Hi there, and welcome to the Solid Foundations for Living, a channel where we dive deep into universal truths, personal development, and timeless wisdom that you can actually use in your life. I'm so glad you're here. Today's episode is titled The Law of Cause and Effect: Science, Buddhism, and Spirituality Compared. And as a psychologist, I'll be guiding you through these different worldviews, not just to understand them intellectually, but to truly reflect on how they play out in your everyday experience, your choices, your mindset, even your emotional patterns. We'll start with what science has to say, how cause and effect functions in the physical world, from physics to neuroscience and behavioral psychology. Then we'll journey into the Buddhist understanding, where karma and the interdependence of all things reveal a far more intricate emotional and spiritual web. And finally, we'll explore a more expansive spiritual perspective, where energy, vibration, and consciousness connect everything in ways that might not be immediately visible, but can feel incredibly real. Throughout, I'll help you compare and integrate these views, offering a grounded, psychologically informed way to make sense of it all. So let's begin at the place where most modern people feel the most familiar: science. When we think of cause and effect in scientific terms, what usually comes to mind is something very direct, very observable. One thing leads to another. You push a domino and it falls. You heat water, it boils. In classical physics, Newton's third law states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This is the essence of mechanical causality. Inputs generate predictable outputs. But what does that look like when we apply it to human beings, our thoughts, feelings, behaviors? This is where psychology enters the frame. For instance, in behavioral psychology, the law of effect, originally proposed by Edward Thorndike in the early 20th century, suggests that behaviors followed by favorable consequences become more likely to occur again. It's the foundational idea behind both classical and operant conditioning. You reward a child for cleaning their room, and they're more likely to do it again. You touch a hot stove and experience pain, you're less likely to repeat the action. Now that seems straightforward, right? But here's where it gets interesting, and where the psychologist in me perks up. Human beings aren't machines. We don't always respond to stimuli in linear or predictable ways. Our perceptions, beliefs, and internal narratives play a huge role in mediating what we see as a cause and what we perceive as an effect. Let me give you a quick example. Imagine two people walking through a forest. They both hear a sudden rustle in the bushes. One instantly feels fear, perhaps because of a childhood memory of being startled by a wild animal. The other feels curiosity, maybe recalling afternoons spent exploring nature. Same stimulus, completely different reactions. Why? Because the real cause is not just the rustle in the bushes, it's how each person interprets it, consciously or unconsciously. This highlights a core truth from cognitive psychology. Events do not cause emotions directly. Rather, our interpretations of events, the meaning we assign, act as mediating variables. In this way, we begin to see that cause and effect is not just an external chain of physical events. It also unfolds internally, in complex psychological loops. And when we move deeper into neuroscience, the complexity intensifies. Your brain is not a fixed, clockwork machine. It's a dynamic, ever-adapting network shaped by both biology and experience. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, means that every thought, every repeated behavior, every emotional habit creates neural pathways that make certain responses more likely in the future. This is cause and effect at a micro level, but over time, it shapes everything from your mood to your sense of identity. Let's take anxiety, for example. If you've repeatedly experienced situations where you felt unsafe or judged, your brain may start to treat even mildly stressful situations as threats. The cause might not be obvious. It's not the meeting at work that causes the anxiety. It's the accumulated pattern of associations, the brain's prediction system firing based on past conditioning. So in this light, science gives us both a gift and a limitation. The gift is clarity, understanding mechanisms, predicting outcomes, altering behaviors. It gives us powerful tools, like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, that can help individuals interrupt maladaptive patterns by changing their thoughts and behaviors. But the limitation lies in its scope. Traditional science often struggles to explain phenomena that are non-local, non-measurable, or subjective, like intuition, synchronicity, or the deep sense of moral consequence that some people feel, even in the absence of any obvious feedback loop. This is where other worldviews, like Buddhism and spirituality, begin to fill in the picture. They point us toward a more subtle, often non-linear sense of cause and effect, one that includes not just physical actions, but intention, awareness, and even silence. And as a psychologist, I find this profoundly important. Because when we expand our view of causality to include the inner life, not just the visible action, but the invisible intention, we begin to see how much power we actually have in shaping our reality. Not just by what we do, but by how we perceive, how we feel, how we choose. So let's turn now to one of the oldest and most psychologically nuanced frameworks of all, the Buddhist understanding of cause and effect. In Buddhism, the law of cause and effect is not just a philosophical principle, it's the very fabric of existence. Known most prominently through the concept of karma, and more fundamentally through pratyasamutpada, or dependent origination, Buddhism approaches causality with a level of psychological depth that's remarkably ahead of its time. Let's start with karma. Now, many people in the West have a simplistic view of karma. It's often reduced to what goes around comes around, or a cosmic scoreboard keeping track of your moral wins and losses. But from a psychological standpoint, that misses the real essence. In the Buddhist framework, karma is not a system of reward and punishment. It's about intention, the seed behind every action. The word karma literally means action, but what really matters is why the action was taken. What was the mental state behind it? Was it rooted in greed, anger, delusion, or was it born from compassion, wisdom, clarity? This is where Buddhism and psychology beautifully intersect. You see, in cognitive behavioral therapy, we often explore how automatic thoughts, especially those born from deep emotional wounds, lead to reactive behaviors. But Buddhism takes it a step further. It suggests that every intentional act plants a psychological seed, not just in the mind, but in the moral and energetic field of our being. These seeds may sprout immediately, or they may take lifetimes to bear fruit, depending on conditions. Now, whether or not you believe in reincarnation isn't the point. Even in this lifetime, we can observe how certain patterns repeat, how unhealed intentions echo through relationships, decisions, and inner conflicts. That's karma in action, more as momentum than moral bookkeeping. And then there's dependent origination, pratyasamutpada, which takes the idea of cause and effect into truly profound territory. This principle teaches that nothing exists independently. Every phenomenon, physical, emotional, psychological, arises in dependence upon other conditions. This includes your identity, your suffering, your joy. In other words, there is no single cause for anything. There's a web, a constellation. Imagine a flower. It exists not just because of the seed, but because of the soil, the sunlight, the rain, the temperature, the pollinators, and even the air. Remove any one condition, and the flower can't manifest. The same is true of your anger, your happiness, your beliefs about yourself. They arise not from one isolated event, but from a convergence of factors, some visible, some buried in memory, some collective. As a psychologist, this insight is incredibly liberating. So often, we search for the root cause of our pain, expecting it to be a single event, a trauma, a trigger. But Buddhism invites us to see beyond the linear. It shows us how healing is about understanding patterns, not just pinpointing singular origins. Now here's the truly empowering part. In Buddhist psychology, if suffering arises from conditions, then freedom can also arise by changing the conditions. That means awareness, mindfulness, and compassion are not just spiritual practices, they're interventions. They shift the inner ecology from which your experience arises. Let me offer a simple example. Say you have a recurring pattern of feeling unworthy in relationships. The scientific approach might trace that back to attachment styles or early relational trauma. The Buddhist approach would ask, what mental habits, what beliefs, what emotional conditions are you unconsciously nurturing every day that allow that unworthiness to arise? And more importantly, what new conditions can you cultivate instead? Gratitude, self-compassion, silence, generosity. These aren't just feel-good ideas. From a Buddhist view, they're karmic builders. They shape the trajectory of your being in real time. And let's not forget the ultimate goal in Buddhism, liberation from suffering, not by escaping life, but by deeply understanding its causes. Suffering, in Buddhist terms, is not punishment. It's feedback. It's a signpost pointing toward clinging, aversion, and delusion. When we observe our suffering with awareness, we become capable of responding differently. That's where the chain of cause and effect begins to loosen. That's where freedom lives, not in controlling life, but in understanding our relationship to it. Now compare this to the scientific model we discussed earlier. Science typically emphasizes external causality, stimulus and response, neurons firing, behaviors repeating. Buddhism emphasizes internal causality, mental states, volition, perception, and the power of presence. Both are true, both are useful, but they point to different layers of reality. And as a psychologist, I find this synthesis incredibly potent, because when you combine the two, you get a more holistic understanding. Your brain may react a certain way, but your awareness of that reaction creates space for transformation. In that space, intention becomes the new cause, and healing becomes not just possible, but inevitable. So where does that leave us? Science teaches us the mechanics. Buddhism teaches us the meaning. But there's still another dimension, one that reaches beyond both empirical observation and structured philosophy. It's the realm of spirit, energy, and interconnected consciousness. Let's step into that now and explore how spiritual traditions understand the law of cause and effect, not as a mechanical process, nor simply as a moral one, but as an energetic dance between intention, vibration, and the universe itself. When we enter the spiritual dimension of cause and effect, we step into a realm that speaks not only to the mind, but to the heart and soul. Here, causality isn't limited to physical action or even moral intention. It's something more subtle, more expansive, what many traditions describe as energy, vibration, or conscious alignment. Now, I want to say this clearly as a psychologist. While this language might sound abstract or unscientific, it often maps onto deeply felt human experiences, things like intuition, synchronicity, or that inexplicable sense of knowing that a certain choice or moment is significant, even if logic can't explain why. In spiritual teachings, from Vedic philosophy to New Thought to modern interpretations like the law of attraction, there's an understanding that our inner state doesn't just affect how we experience the world, but actually helps create our experience of reality. The idea is this: everything is energy, and energy has frequency. Your thoughts, emotions, and intentions aren't just private experiences, they're vibrations. They ripple out into the world, interacting with other vibrations, attracting or repelling outcomes based on resonance. Now, from a psychological lens, this idea isn't as far-fetched as it may seem. We know, for example, that emotional contagion is real. Your mood affects others. Your tone of voice can change the atmosphere in a room. Your belief in your own worth, or lack thereof, can shift how people treat you, often in ways that become self-reinforcing. This is what we might call the energetic field of psychology, a space where thoughts and emotions subtly influence not only the self, but the outer world in ways we can't always measure, yet deeply feel. Take the law of attraction, for example. Popularized in the West through books like The Secret, this concept suggests that like attracts like. That if you vibrate at the frequency of abundance, love, or peace, those experiences will naturally come to you. It's not about wishful thinking. It's about internal congruence, your thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and actions all lining up with the energy of what you seek. As a psychologist, I'd frame this in terms of cognitive resonance and self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you're unworthy of love, you'll unconsciously behave in ways that block it. But if you genuinely feel worthy, open, and available, you tend to notice opportunities you once ignored. You engage more fully, radiate more freely, and others feel that. In that sense, the cause isn't just what you do, it's what you are, moment to moment. Spiritual traditions also emphasize a dimension of divine orchestration or universal intelligence. That life is not random, that every encounter, every challenge, every blessing is part of a larger tapestry, a synchronistic unfolding that responds to both your soul's growth and your conscious vibration. Now let's pause for a moment. This view can be incredibly empowering, but it also requires nuance. Because one of the dangers in interpreting spiritual causality is falling into blame-based thinking. The belief that if something bad happens, you must have attracted it, or that your suffering is somehow your fault. That's not only psychologically damaging, it's also a misreading of how complexity works. From a psychologist's perspective, we have to account for collective causes, systemic conditions, and the unpredictable nature of human life. Not everything that happens is a direct reflection of your inner state. Life includes randomness, other people's choices, and the long arcs of karma and healing that may not be visible right away. But here's the key. Spiritual causality reminds us that we are not powerless. Even when we can't control what happens, we can always influence how we respond, and that response becomes a new vibration, a new frequency, a new point of alignment. Whether or not you believe in energy as a literal force, the metaphor is powerful. It calls you to become aware of the field you carry, your tone, your presence, your consciousness. Because the universe, in this view, doesn't just listen to your words, it listens to your being. And interestingly, this aligns with certain ideas in quantum physics, like the observer effect, where the mere act of observing a particle changes its behavior. It aligns with systems theory, where small changes in one part of a system can lead to dramatic shifts elsewhere. It aligns with the psychology of belief, where inner conviction often shapes outer outcomes. So where science gives us structure and Buddhism gives us introspective clarity, spirituality offers us expansiveness. It invites us to see causality not just as a chain, but as a field, a subtle, living interplay of energy, attention, and alignment. And when you bring all three together, science, Buddhism, and spirituality, you begin to see a much fuller picture. Let's take a moment now to draw these perspectives together. When we step back and consider these three perspectives, science, Buddhism, and spirituality, we begin to realize they're not necessarily in opposition. In fact, they often describe the same truths through different languages and lenses. Each one illuminates a part of the whole. Let's compare them side by side, beginning with the nature of causality itself. In science, cause and effect is typically linear and measurable. A leads to B. If you apply a force, you get a reaction. This model is highly effective in understanding the physical world and designing interventions, whether we're building bridges or shaping behavior through reinforcement techniques. In Buddhism, causality is circular and conditional. It's not A causes B in a vacuum. It's that A contributes to B only if all the supporting conditions are present. This is crucial when examining human experience, because it shows how patterns of suffering or joy arise not from one single cause, but from a web of interconnected factors, many of which live in our mental and emotional landscape. And in the spiritual model, causality is vibrational and intuitive. It emphasizes the invisible threads of energy, the alignment between your inner state and the field of possibility around you. Here, cause and effect may not follow a strict timeline. Effects may be delayed. Causes may be energetic rather than physical. This framework doesn't always satisfy the logical mind, but it resonates deeply with many people's lived experience of synchronicity, transformation, and inexplicable inner knowing. So what happens when we apply these models to the same situation? Let's say someone is experiencing chronic stress. From a scientific standpoint, we'd look at their environment, high demands, lack of sleep, perhaps an overactive amygdala, or an imbalance in cortisol levels. We might prescribe cognitive behavioral therapy, exercise, or medication. From a Buddhist lens, we'd examine the person's attachment to outcomes, the craving for control, the resistance to impermanence. Stress isn't just something happening to them, it's arising from clinging to how things should be. Relief comes not only from changing circumstances, but from changing one's relationship to them. From a spiritual view, we'd ask, what energy is this person embodying? Are they in alignment with their values? Are they ignoring intuitive signals to rest, to set boundaries, to reconnect with their deeper purpose? The stress may be a signal, not of dysfunction, but of misalignment. You see, each perspective contributes something unique. And as a psychologist, my job is often to translate between these worlds, to help someone see how their nervous system, their mindset, and their inner energy are all interacting to create their current reality. It's not about choosing one framework, it's about learning how to move fluidly between them. Here's another key difference worth exploring: the role of intention. In science, intention is often seen as secondary. What matters is behavior, what's observable and repeatable. If you press a lever, the machine responds. The reason why you pressed it may not be considered relevant. But in Buddhism and spirituality, intention is everything. In Buddhism, it's what defines karma. A harmful act done with compassion may not bear the same karmic weight as one done with cruelty. In spirituality, your intention sets your vibration, your internal frequency, which then shapes what you attract. So here's the psychological insight. Even if two people do the same thing, the internal experience and long-term consequences can be completely different based on their motives. Are they acting from fear, from love, from ego, from surrender? This is where reflection becomes essential. Cause and effect is not just about the action you take, it's about the energetic signature of that action. And that's something only you can tune into. Let's also talk about time, because each framework treats time differently. Science tends to be immediate and observable. If the effect isn't measurable within a certain time frame, it's often dismissed or deprioritized. Buddhism introduces delayed causality, especially in the context of karma. The effects of an action may not manifest until conditions ripen, maybe days, years, even lifetimes later. Spirituality embraces a non-linear view of time. Cause and effect may unfold in mysterious ways. A thought or prayer may ripple out and return in the form of a dream, a chance meeting, or an intuitive shift that changes the course of your life. This difference in timelines is important psychologically because many people give up on change too soon. They plant a seed of new intention, but because the result isn't immediate, they assume it didn't work. But inner work, whether cognitive, karmic, or energetic, often requires patience, presence, and trust in unseen processes. And that brings us to the idea of responsibility, a common thread across all three views. In science, responsibility means understanding the system you're in and learning how to operate within it. In psychology, that's your behavior patterns, your brain chemistry, your environment. In Buddhism, responsibility means awakening to the mind's role in creating suffering and liberation. You're responsible not just for what you do, but for how you see. And in spirituality, responsibility means aligning your inner world with your highest truth, recognizing that you are a co-creator with the universe, not a passive victim of fate. All three call you to own your power, but in subtly different ways. And when you bring them together, something profound emerges. You are not just the product of your circumstances. You are not just the prisoner of your past. You are a dynamic, conscious being, capable of shifting your reality by choosing your thoughts, your actions, your intentions, and your energy. And that is the deepest truth of the law of cause and effect. Not as something that happens to you, but something that flows through you. A sacred participation in the unfolding of life itself. So let's bring this powerful understanding down to earth. Because no matter how deep or nuanced our exploration gets, the real question is always this: how can I apply this in my life? Here's where the psychologist in me gets especially energized, because the integration of these perspectives isn't just theoretical, it's profoundly practical. And you don't need to adopt any specific belief system to benefit from them. You just need curiosity, honesty, and the willingness to reflect. Let's begin with something simple but transformative: awareness of patterns. From a scientific and psychological view, much of our behavior is habitual. Neural pathways formed through repetition guide our actions, often without our conscious input. These patterns can work for us or against us, depending on the conditions under which they were formed. From the Buddhist perspective, these are samskaras, imprints or tendencies that shape perception and reaction. They're karmic grooves etched into the mind stream, often unnoticed, yet profoundly influential. From a spiritual standpoint, these patterns are energetic loops. They vibrate at a certain frequency and magnetize similar experiences into your life. That's why people often say things like, "Why do I keep attracting the same type of relationship?" Or "Why does this keep happening to me?" Now, here's the empowering truth. Patterns can be interrupted. The first step is awareness. Ask yourself, what outcomes do I consistently experience that feel negative or draining? What choices do I repeatedly make despite knowing they don't serve me? What inner state usually precedes those choices? This is cause and effect in action. And once you see the link between cause, your internal state, your habitual story, your default reaction, and effect, your lived outcome, you can begin to insert something powerful into the chain: conscious choice. Let's say you notice that you often feel overlooked or unappreciated at work. You might automatically assume the external world is to blame. But what happens when you investigate the internal causes? Are you waiting for recognition without expressing your needs? Are you subconsciously holding back your voice due to fear of judgment? Are you vibrating at a frequency of invisibility because of an old belief that you don't matter? If so, then changing the outer situation without shifting the inner cause will likely lead to more of the same. So what do? We turn inward and apply tools from all three frameworks. From science and psychology, we use reflection, journaling, and therapy techniques like cognitive restructuring to bring hidden beliefs into the light and challenge them with logic and evidence. From Buddhism, we practice mindfulness. We become the observer of our mental states without judgment. We sit with discomfort instead of reacting to it. And gradually, this space of awareness weakens the grip of conditioned patterns. From spirituality, we align our intentions with our highest values. We visualize not just outcomes, but states of being. We cultivate gratitude, peace, and trust, not because it guarantees an external result, but because it shifts the entire field of our experience. Another key application is in the realm of decision-making. Too often, we make decisions based solely on external logic or fear-based impulses. But when we understand the layers of causality, we begin asking better questions. What is the intention behind this choice? Is this aligned with my values, or am I reacting out of habit or fear? What emotional and energetic state am I in as I make this decision? This matters deeply, because the same decision made from peace will carry a very different vibration and likely a different outcome than one made from panic or ego. Let's go one step further. Imagine applying this holistic awareness to your relationships. Science tells us relationships are systems. One person's behavior influences the others, often unconsciously. Buddhism adds that relationships are vehicles for karma, mirrors reflecting our attachments, aversions, and projections. And spirituality reminds us that relationships are energetic exchanges, where intention and resonance play a massive role. So when conflict arises, instead of just blaming or withdrawing, we might ask, what's being activated in me right now? What unconscious cause am I contributing to this dynamic? How can I bring presence, compassion, or a higher vibration into this moment? These are not small questions. They are transformative ones. And over time, they create a new trajectory, both within and between people. Now let's talk about agency, your ability to shape your life. One of the most dangerous psychological beliefs is learned helplessness, the idea that nothing you do matters, that outcomes are random or inevitable, that you are at the mercy of life. But when you understand cause and effect across all three dimensions, scientific, Buddhist, and spiritual, you begin to reclaim your agency on multiple levels. Behaviorally, by noticing and shifting your actions. Mentally, by examining your thoughts and reframing your perceptions. energetically by choosing your emotional vibration and aligning with deeper truth. You don't need to control the whole universe. You just need to take full ownership of your part, your frequency, your choices, your presence. That's where your power lives. And finally, let's talk about cultivating intentional causes. Not just reacting to life, but actively planting seeds for the future you want to experience. This can be as simple as starting your day with stillness or gratitude, speaking from truth even when it's hard, practicing forgiveness toward yourself and others, listening to intuition rather than fear, choosing kindness when irritation arises. These may seem small, but in the language of cause and effect, they are seismic. Because each one shifts the inner field, and that inner field is what shapes your experience of the outer world. So whether you're drawn to science, to contemplative practice, or to spiritual exploration, know this: you are not a passive observer in the story of your life. You are a conscious participant in the law of cause and effect. And every moment, every breath is an opportunity to shape what comes next. As we journey deeper into this understanding, we must also hold space for the nuances, because life, as you well know, doesn't always offer clear answers or linear progressions. Cause and effect, while foundational, can be astonishingly complex in the real world. Let's begin with the challenge of isolating causes in complex systems. As a psychologist, I often see people desperately trying to find the reason for their pain. Why am I anxious? Why did my relationship fail? Why haven't I succeeded? These are valid questions, but they often come from a desire for simplicity in a world that's inherently multifactorial. The truth is, most experiences, especially emotional ones, don't arise from a single cause. They're the result of interacting variables: personal history, beliefs, biology, environment, cultural influences, and even ancestral patterns. Think of it like weather. You can't blame one cloud for the storm. You have to consider wind patterns, pressure systems, humidity levels, all converging. Similarly, your suffering, your joy, your moments of insight, they all arise from confluence. That's why both Buddhist philosophy and modern systems theory speak not in linear chains, but in networks. And this can be profoundly freeing, because if there's no single cause of your pain, then healing doesn't have to be a perfect solution. It can be a shift in any one part of the system. Change one relationship, challenge one belief, introduce one new habit, and the ripple effect begins. Now let's talk about something more philosophical, but deeply human: the interplay of free will and determinism. This debate runs through all three frameworks. In science, especially neuroscience, some findings suggest our decisions are made milliseconds before we consciously register them. That's led some to argue that free will is an illusion, a post hoc story the brain tells itself. In Buddhism, there's a paradox. On one hand, much of your experience is shaped by karma and conditioned patterns. On the other, liberation depends on your capacity to awaken through choice, effort, and mindfulness. And in spirituality, we often encounter the idea of soul contracts, divine timing, or destiny, suggesting that some aspects of life are pre-written, while others are co-created in real time. So what's the psychological takeaway? We may not choose the cards we're dealt, but we can learn how to play them with wisdom. Free will may not be absolute, but it is relational. You gain more freedom as you gain more awareness. Each insight, each act of courage, each moment of compassion expands the space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you become more than your programming. Another nuance that deserves attention is the role of belief, especially in shaping outcomes. This is particularly relevant in the spiritual model, where your belief, your expectation, can actually influence what you attract or experience. But even in science, we see this in the placebo effect, where a person's belief in a treatment's efficacy produces measurable improvement, regardless of the treatment's actual content. And in psychology, beliefs are central to every model of change, from cognitive behavioral therapy to narrative therapy. Your core beliefs shape your perception, and perception shapes your reality. So if you believe that you're not worthy of love, your mind will filter for evidence that supports that. If you believe you're capable of growth, you'll notice opportunities to expand. Belief isn't magic, it's a filtering mechanism, and the law of cause and effect responds to the filter you wear. That's why changing your belief system, even slightly, can dramatically shift your experience. let's pause and reflect. What beliefs are you carrying about yourself, about others, about the world? Are they opening you up to healing and connection, or are they closing you down in fear and resignation? This is not about shame or blame. It's about awakening. Because when you begin to question your beliefs, not with hostility, but with compassion, you begin to loosen the causes of suffering and invite the conditions for peace. So yes, cause and effect is a universal law, but it's not simplistic. It's layered, it's relational, it's alive, and it's operating not just around you, but through you. The more aware you become of these subtleties of how internal and external worlds dance together, the more empowered you are to live intentionally, respond wisely, and create meaning from even the most chaotic moments. And that leads us beautifully into a brief summary of what we've explored so far. We began with science, where cause and effect is defined by physical laws, neurological conditioning, and behavior. It's a world of measurable inputs and observable outputs, a vital tool for understanding how our bodies and environments shape experience. Then we moved into Buddhism, where cause and effect reveals itself through karma and dependent origination. Here, the focus is on mental states, intentions, and the complex interplay of conditions that give rise to suffering or freedom. It's a path of mindfulness, insight, and gradual liberation. From there, we expanded into the spiritual view, where cause and effect becomes vibrational, an energetic feedback loop between your consciousness and the universe. Here, belief, resonance, and alignment create the stage upon which experience unfolds. It's not deterministic, it's participatory. Finally, we compared these models, highlighting their shared wisdom, that you have agency, that your inner world matters, and that intentional living leads to empowered outcomes. And what makes this truly profound is that you don't have to choose between them. You can draw from each one, adapting your understanding to different contexts, trusting that truth wears many costumes, but it always points in the same direction, toward greater awareness, toward deeper responsibility, toward more authentic freedom. So now that we've explored the law of cause and effect through these powerful lenses, let's talk about how this understanding can directly enrich your life. Not someday, not hypothetically, but right now. When you begin to live with an integrated awareness of cause and effect, something shifts. You stop moving through life unconsciously. You stop reacting out of habit or fear, and instead, you begin to choose. Consciously, deliberately, lovingly. Here are a few practical, psychology-informed strategies you can use to apply this wisdom every single day, whether you lean more towards science, spirituality, Buddhism, or a blend of all three. First, cultivate a practice of intentional reflection. At the end of each day, take 5 minutes to ask, what thoughts or emotions dominated my inner world today? What were the consequences, internally and externally, of those states? What subtle cause might I have planted today that I'll harvest tomorrow? This is more than a journaling exercise. It's a recalibration of your awareness. It helps you spot patterns and gently adjust them, not from judgment, but from a desire to evolve. Second, create conscious cause moments. What do I mean by that? Well, in every interaction, you have the opportunity to initiate a cause that will ripple outward. Whether it's a kind word, a pause instead of a reaction, or a clear boundary set with compassion, that moment becomes a new thread in the web of your life. It's not about being perfect, it's about being present. Third, harness the power of intention setting. Before major decisions or even small ones, pause and ask, what energy am I bringing into this? Is it fear, obligation, love, integrity? Your intention doesn't just influence what you do, it alters how the action is received. It infuses the moment with meaning. From a psychological view, intention shapes attention, and attention shapes perception. What you focus on becomes your filter, your guide, your map. So each morning, set an intention. Not a rigid goal, but a direction of heart. Today I choose clarity. Today I move from kindness. Today I remain open to what wants to unfold. Fourth, begin to reframe difficult experiences using the lens of layered causality. When something painful happens, it's easy to spiral into blame, either of yourself, others, or life itself. But try asking, what layers of cause contributed to this moment? What unseen conditions may have played a role? What new intention can I plant now, even in the face of discomfort? This doesn't excuse harm or erase injustice, but it moves you from reactivity to responsiveness, a core psychological shift that empowers healing. Fifth, and perhaps most profound, develop compassion for the causes you cannot see. This is something both Buddhist and spiritual perspectives emphasize, that not all causes are visible. Some unfold in realms of karma, energy, or ancestral patterning. Others are part of collective systems, too vast to pinpoint. As a psychologist, I often remind clients, you are not just an isolated self, you are part of a living system. And sometimes, understanding that brings a kind of grace. When you extend compassion to yourself, not just for what you've done, but for what you didn't know, you begin to soften the harshness of self-judgment. And that, in itself, becomes a new cause, one that breeds healing rather than shame. Let's also remember this: tiny actions have profound effects. One breath of awareness, one apology, one honest conversation, one moment of gratitude. These are not small things. These are causes, seeds that ripple through time in ways you may never fully understand. You don't need to control the outcome. You only need to plant with love. Now, before we close, I want to acknowledge something important. Living with awareness of cause and effect is not about becoming hypervigilant or obsessed with control. It's about becoming intimately attuned to the dance between your inner world and the outer one. It's about recognizing your role in the unfolding of your life and honoring that role with as much humility as strength. So wherever you are right now, whether you feel stuck, empowered, confused, or inspired, know this: you can begin again with this very breath. Because the future is not random. It is born, moment by moment, from the energy, choices, and consciousness you bring into now. Let's summarize the journey we've taken together. We began by exploring the universal mystery of cause and effect. Then, we moved through science, which showed us the physical and behavioral mechanics of causality. We delved into Buddhism, where karma and dependent origination revealed the inner dynamics of intention and mental conditioning. Then we embraced a spiritual understanding, where energy, vibration, and alignment shape our lived experience in deeply felt, though often unseen ways. We compared these views, saw their differences and common threads, and ultimately discovered that together they offer a unified field, one that respects both the measurable and the mysterious. And perhaps most importantly, we brought this wisdom down into your daily life. Because understanding is powerful, but applied understanding, that's transformational. So as you move forward, remember, every thought is a seed, every action a ripple, every intention a compass. You are not just a result of causes. You are also a cause of results. Live like that, and you live in alignment with the deepest truth of all. Before you go, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to the Solid Foundations for Living, where we explore timeless truths and personal growth through thoughtful, accessible, and psychologically grounded conversations. If this episode resonated with you, please consider liking, sharing, or leaving a comment. Tell us, which perspective spoke to you the most? How do you see cause and effect playing out in your life? And as always, stay mindful, stay curious, and stay rooted in what matters most. Until next time.